Hello, my name is Michael Tesaro and I prepared this cheat sheet for May 2024. And as you're probably aware, what I do is seek to summarise all the ACCC developments in a particular month so that you don't have to read all those media releases. So this is a summary of all the events that happened in relation to ACCC in May 2024. Bit of background about myself. I'm a competition and consumer lawyer and I've been running my own practice, Tesaro Legal Consulting, for the last 17 years. And I help companies and individuals with competition and consumer law matters. I also do some expert consultancy work for various legal publishers and competition consumer law. And I'm also a part-time general member of the Consumer and Commercial Division of NCAT. Prior to that, I worked at the ACCC for 15 years in a variety of roles, including enforcement and mergers. Now, the outline is fairly typical: courts, enforcement action, mergers, scams, inquiries, consultations, and others. And there was only one court case, but it was a fairly big one and hasn't actually been resolved yet. And that's obviously the ACCC Qantas case. And it was announced in early May that the ACCC and Qantas had come to a settlement agreement whereby Qantas admitted that it had misled its consumers by advertising tickets for tens of thousands of flights it had already decided to cancel, and by cancelling thousands of other flights without promptly telling ticket holders of its decision. And they've agreed on a penalty of $100 million, but that has to be agreed to by the judge. And the judge in this particular case is Justice Roth. It's a relatively new judge, so it'd be up to her to decide whether to agree to the $100 million penalty. And Qantas has also agreed to pay $20 million of compensation to 86,000 consumers who were sold tickets on flights that Qantas had already decided to cancel, or in some cases who were reaccommodated on these flights after the original flights were cancelled. And that works out roughly to be $225 per domestic customer and $450 for international ticket holders. So this is interesting. When the case was filed, I think Qantas were fairly aggressive in their response, claiming that they hadn't breached the law, that they didn't actually sell tickets, and around this argument they sell a bundle of rights, which didn't go down very well in the media. And then obviously when it came down to a mediation, I think they realised running this case, A, they would lose, and B, it had caused a lot of negative publicity for them. Whether they would have been fined more than $100 million in a contested case, I'm not too sure. I think judges still have a little bit of reluctance of going over that into the $100 million realm. So I'm not too sure whether the judge would have imposed such a big penalty. I think the interesting thing here is whether the judge will say 100 million is not enough. There's a lot of commentary in the media that maybe 100 million is not enough for what they did. But I'd be surprised if Justice Rolfe indicated it wasn't high enough and needed to be increased. And that what happened in the VW case, the Volkswagen case, where Justice Foster decided that the penalty that was agreed to $75 million wasn't high enough and increased it to 125. The next matter was an enforcement matter, and this is a number of these four-wheel drive accessory companies engaging in resale price maintenance. And both companies admitted to engaging in RPM, and there seems to be quite a lot of RPM going on in various industries at the moment. There's been a lot of cases in the last 6 months or 12 months by the ACCC. But the approach the ACCC is taking isn't to litigate, which is different to the day when I was at the ACCC. I used to litigate all these RPM cases, but this is a much more sensible approach because a lot of people, a lot of companies engage in RPM without realising it's illegal. So it's best just to get them to stop doing it and ensure there's some compliance mechanisms in place to stop them doing it again. So in this case, MSA directed some of its retailers not to discount their products below a particular discount percentage, and they warned them that if they did so, they would not be allowed to discount off the recommended retail price. And then Off-Road Animal, which I really like that name, directed resellers and prospective resellers not to advertise their products below the RRP. So obviously MSA's conduct probably wasn't quite as bad. They did allow some discounting off RRP, but Off-Road Animal, no discounting off the RRP. So that was probably more serious. And the remedies was an 87B undertaking for both of them: provide corrective notices to resellers to tell them that they can set their own prices. They had to publish corrective notices on each of their websites and establish a compliance program. So that's a sensible outcome, I think. I don't think you want to be taking these guys to court. The next one is the LG Energy Solution case, and this is the one where LG was selling these solar storage batteries under a number of different brands, and they have been malfunctioning. They can overheat and cause a fire. And there was 18,000 batteries sold, as I said, under a number of different brands, and they have been linked to 15 incidents of property damage when the solar battery overheated and caught fire, and including one house in Victoria was completely destroyed. Now, the thing that is concerning about this is that there's 4,400 batteries that still can't be located, which I don't understand that. I just thought that in the solar industry, everything had to be carefully documented, where batteries and every element in a solar panel system had to be recorded and sent to the Clean Energy Regulator. So I just don't understand how they can't locate them. And these aren't the kinds of things, these cost a few dollars. So you think they'd have some invoices, maybe one of their distributors hasn't kept very good records or something, but it's still not explained how they don't have details of where these solar batteries are installed. Now, what happened here is the ACCC was suggesting a mandatory recall through the minister, and LG, I think, tried to forestall that by coming to the ACCC and offering some further remedies to try and ensure that all the batteries were found. So they agreed to undertake a widespread advertising campaign to alert customers about the safety risks, use their best endeavours to ensure that all affected batteries are remedied within 12 months. If this is enough to avoid a compulsory recall, I'm not too sure. The minister was very close to issuing the compulsory recall, and I think there's still a chance that it might be ordered. And clearly, if there's a compulsory recall, they've just got to devote a huge amount of resources to doing that. The classic compulsory recall that cost a lot of motor vehicle companies a lot of money was the Takata airbag recall. So I think that's still on the cards to be a compulsory recall. There were a couple of mergers. There was a Louis Dreyfus Company's proposed acquisition of Namoi Cotton, and this, I think, inevitably was going to cause some problems. It's a fairly concentrated market. So both Louis Dreyfus and Namoi supply cotton ginning, cotton lint classing, logistics and warehousing services, and they both engage in the acquisition and marketing of cotton lint and cotton seed. Now, ACCC concerned on a number of levels, particularly that the proposed acquisition was likely to substantially lessen competition in the supply of cotton ginning services in the north of Western Australia and Northern Territory. And that's because the two companies were involved in different cotton gins in that area. So firstly, LDC was getting involved in a new cotton gin up there, and also Namoi. So the ACCC is concerned that if the merger went through, LDC would be able to reduce competition in that particular geographic market, and that would result in higher prices or reduced levels of services for ginning services. There was also concerns about the marketing of cotton lint and seed. I think that'd probably be a lesser concern than the other concerns the ACCC identified. So I think this could be interesting. I have a feeling that there might have to be a divestiture of an asset to get that merger across the line. Global Payments Australia 1 Proprietary Limited and School Bytes Learning, and I do know a bit about this because I used to be on a school board, and effectively there are a number of school information software and financial software programs, and it's quite interesting. A number of them are geared primarily to the public school sector, and others are geared towards the independent school sector. And the major reason for that is that the public school sector is quite different in the way it's set up. There's a lot of centralized control over various issues, so the school information software doesn't quite have to have the same functionality, because a lot of the work is done by head office, so to speak. And the independent schools, the systems have to be able to do effectively everything, because a lot of independent schools operate on a standalone basis. So here, the two programs that are dominating the public school sector are Central and School Bytes, and there's a third supplier. And effectively, they're really the two largest suppliers of this software to New South Wales public schools. And they obviously have a lot of close relationships. A lot of schools have not only implemented these particular systems, but trained all their staff, and everything's relying on these systems. And changing your school information software is a big deal. I know that the school that I'm associated with uses PC Schools, and it's likely to be undergoing some changes soon. So schools looking around for a new supplier. And as you can see, the ACCC formed the view on a preliminary basis. The barriers to entry were high, and it's difficult for schools to switch completely to new suppliers, and I think that's exactly correct. So here you've got a problem. I think if the merger goes through, these two entities would probably be responsible for supplying these particular software products into 90% of New South Wales public schools. And I guess I don't know if there's any suggestions there that maybe School Bytes needs to exit the market for a particular reason, but as it looks at the moment, it looks unlikely to get through. I know there might be a new entrant coming into the market, but I don't know if it's coming into the public school sector. Maybe it's coming into the independent sector. Now, another merger, this is a cash transit arrangement, which is a bit of a disaster. This is the one where Armaguard agreed to get together with Prosegur, which is a Spanish company, and I don't know why Prosegur entered this market a few years ago, because it was clearly a declining market and they haven't been able to make any money since they came in. And there was this proposed merger, very complicated. It was an authorization, merger authorization. There was an agreement whereby the two would merge, but they had to give a series of undertakings to maintain prices and do various things. And there was an independent reviewer who had to monitor and prepare reports. But it became quite apparent almost immediately after that merger was signed off on that it wasn't working, that Armaguard looked like it was going to go broke. And then the banks were going to kick in some money, not just the banks, but also some major retailers and Australia Post, to try and keep this company afloat. And then Armaguard, which is owned by Linfox, said, "We don't want your money," and they kicked in some money themselves. And now it doesn't look like it's sufficient. There was talk about Prosegur buying out Armaguard, so it's all very confusing. And now the ACCC has granted authorization for a number of organisations to get together to talk about how they're going to keep cash and transit operations continuing in Australia. So you've got the ABA, Customer Owned Banking Association, all the big banks, retailers, so Coles, Woolies, Australia Post, and other industry participants. Another group that's involved is government. The Treasurer is involved here and really needs to achieve a solution here. We can't have a system which can't transport cash. It'd just be a disaster. So just watch this space. I think Armaguard might have a few questions to answer, because some of the things that they said to the ACCC to get the authorization across the line don't seem to have been accurate. So maybe the ACCC will have a closer look at that. This highlights the way that the merger system is currently and for the near future is so dependent on people telling the truth. And unfortunately, there seems to be a spate of companies who probably haven't told the full truth to the ACCC when trying to get a merger through. Scams. There was one particular scam alerted in May by the National Anti-Scam Centre. It was remote access scams. I think you're pretty familiar with people. Effectively, the consumer gets a phone call out of the blue informing them an issue with their account, phone or computer. Sometimes you get a email message or SMS even. The consumer speaks with the scammer over the phone and instructed to download software or an app which allows the scammer to gain control. And this is the thing, this is personal contact. There's some personal discussion over the phone, and that just enhances the trust between the consumer and the scammer. So that's a big difference between a lot of scams that are just purely electronic. Once a scammer has access to computer program, mobile phone, they seek to access bank accounts under the pretense they're helping to resolve an account issue. And this might just be hacking in, might be monitoring keystrokes, or they might just ask the person for their details, which unfortunately is handed over. As you can see, the consumer may be asked to read out banking passwords or one-time security codes, which gives the scammer access to the bank accounts to complete the fraudulent transactions. The consumer may be unaware they've been scammed until all the money's gone. And as you can see, Australians reported losing $15.5 million to these remote access scams in 2023. They reported losses to remote scams in the first quarter of 2024 have increased 52%. There you can see it's an increasing scam. People are losing more money. The average loss per scam victim increased as well, 57%, to 17,943. That's a lot, really, when you think about it. And then Australians over the age of 65 are suffering the largest losses, so obviously targeting maybe older Australians. Inquiries consultations, there was two. The first was a digital platforms inquiry report into data collection. This was a report that the ACCC kicked off, I think it was last year, looking at data collection agencies, and they identified a bunch of them they were going to look at. And they found that consumers are generally unaware just how much data is being collected, and that it's also being used and shared with data firms and other businesses. So if you allow people to collect your data, it goes in lots of different places which you're not aware of those places. So the data firms collect consumer data from a range of online and offline sources and use to create and sell data services to a variety of business consumers. So they sell discs with all this information. That forms the basis for telemarketing calls and other things like that. They often have long and complex privacy policies and use ambiguous take it or leave it language that makes it difficult for consumers to understand what they're consenting to. Data collection practices do not align with consumer expectations. So this is a consumer study in 2023 which found that 74% of Australians are uncomfortable with their personal data being shared with and sold to other companies. So people don't like what's going on and don't realise the extent to which it is going on. That a lot of data is being obtained and then sold on to lots of different customers. Then the recommendation was one recommendation really in relation to a lot of digital platforms is to establish new service-specific mandatory codes of conduct for particular designated digital platforms, and that would include one for data collection. And I think the ACCC has had some encouragement from government that they do actually like this idea, and a bit of work is starting on preparing these service-specific mandatory codes. The second one was about domestic airline competition in Australia, and I guess the finding here is that the aviation sector appears to have recovered from COVID, and passenger levels and capacity have returned to pre-pandemic levels. So that's a pretty quick recovery, particularly the last report showed that they were still behind. The major airlines carried 4.9 million domestic passengers in March 2024, which is 98.8% of pre-COVID numbers, so we're almost at the same level. Airlines also flew 6.2 million seats in March, which is just below the capacity recorded pre-COVID. In March 2024, average revenue per domestic passenger increased in both nominal terms by 1.4% and real terms 4.8%. And that's probably going to keep going up, unfortunately. As you can see in the last point there, Bonza has gone into liquidation. There's a chance, or voluntary administration I should say, and there's a chance those assets, well, they've realistically left the market. I think the lease operator flew them out of the country almost immediately, but I guess if nobody steps in to try and revive Bonza, there'll be less competition, and accordingly prices will probably go up. So I'll wait and see if somebody does step in and take up Bonza, but I'd be really surprised if anybody did. Although this was what they call a unilateral code sharing agreement between Virgin and Air New Zealand, and this is allowing basically Virgin to sell capacity on Air New Zealand planes in the Tasman route, and effectively it needs to be authorised because there's an arrangement whereby the code share rights are provided on the condition that Air New Zealand specifies the fares at which Virgin Australia may market and risk by those itineraries. So the competitor is setting the prices at which Virgin flights will be offered on Air New Zealand planes. It's all a bit complicated. And obviously the ACCC didn't think this was going to result in any detriment and was going to create a public benefit by making more seats available on this particular route. So I guess they decided to authorise it. The other issue was the toppling furniture standard. It's a new information standard for toppling furniture. So it's just information standard. So it's stuff that you have to tell consumers when they buy particular products which have a capacity to topple over. Now the statistics here are very concerning. Since 2000, 28 people, including 17 children under 5, have died in Australia from toppling furniture, and that surprised me. That's a lot of people dying from that particular toppling furniture. And then you have another 900 Australians suffering or requiring medical assistance from toppling furniture. So they're very concerning numbers. And obviously the furniture that's most likely, anything with drawers that people tend to use as a sort of like a ladder, but also wardrobes, bookshelves, TV units, other tall items. And if they're not properly secured, they can topple over when children attempt to climb. It also sounds like adults trying to climb on them as well, so it's not purely children. The standard requires suppliers to provide safety warnings and advice about how to reduce toppling furniture incidents. And the information standard requires 3 things: attach a permanent warning label to furniture, include safety information advice about anchoring furniture in manuals and assembly instructions, provide warnings about the hazards of toppling furniture in furniture stores and online. And invariably this type of furniture comes with anchoring equipment, so that's included in the package. So just a bit of commentary. The Qantas proposed penalty 100 million. I thought it was a pretty good penalty. I think we're going to see a lot more penalties coming through in the future over $100 million mark. Some people think it wasn't high enough, but I think if you consent to admit not all your conduct that they're alleged to have engaged in, but most of it, and you settle the matter early, I think you can be expecting a $100 million penalty. I guess Justice Roth could say it's inadequate and increase it. Usually when that happens, the parties are given an opportunity to withdraw the case and maybe fight it out, or go and do have some further discussions. But it's always a possibility you might have a rerun of the Volkswagen case with Justice Foster, and he just said 75 wasn't enough. He upped it 50 million to 125 million, and the parties just took it on the chin initially, then appealed, were unsuccessful, and then sought leave to appeal to the High Court and were rejected. So $125 million stood. So there'll be some pressure, I guess, on Justice Roth maybe to sort of say it's not really high enough and suggest it should be higher. I think that's unlikely, but LG Solutions, have they done enough to avoid a compulsory or mandatory recall? I don't know. I think they're just agreeing to do a bit more of what they've been doing previously. I think they just got to explain how they don't know where these units are. I just cannot understand how you don't know where large, expensive solar batteries are located in Australia. It's just the kind of thing there has to be records of. So I still think there's a chance that the minister may decide to make a mandatory recall. Cash in transit's been a debacle. I don't know what's been going on there. I think a lot of strange things have been told to the ACCC, which just proved not to be accurate at all. Obviously, Armaguard really was only going to be able to sustain their position in the market by increasing prices, but for some reason they undertook not to increase prices. So the government is clearly heavily involved here and needs to do something to get this over the line. It might be simply that Armaguard has to exit the market, and a new company set up, run by the banks, and various parties have a big interest in maintaining cash in transit, and they run it. I don't know if that's possible, but I think the government's and the ACCC may have lost their patience with Armaguard. The final thing, data brokers, I think an interesting report. I don't know if it's entirely surprising what they found, the ACCC, but it'd be interesting to see if these particular recommendations about industry sector-specific industry codes of conduct comes into play in the near future. And if they do, I think data brokers will be one where there'll be a lot of obligations in terms of disclosure, fixing up terms and conditions to make sure they're more transparent. And so we'll wait and see what happens there. So that's all I had. It wasn't a super busy month for the ACCC. I guess if you have any questions about this presentation, feel free to give me a call or send me an email. Bye-bye.